Hello, book lovers. Welcome to the 152nd episode of Authors Love Bookstores, broadcasting here on a mighty blaze. I'm your host, Kimberly Hensle Lowrance, and I am so excited for today's episode. We are going to be in conversation with the author of one of my favorite reads of 2023. This book was such a favorite. I've read it twice this year, and I've been recommending it to everyone. Our guest is LAUREN J.A. Bear, author of MEDUSA'S Sisters. It feels like Lauren might be frozen a little bit, so let's see if we can get unfrozen. Well, while we're figuring that out, and we just lost her. Oh. So thank you all for your patience. So we are going to hope that Lauren comes right back. And while my producer is figuring out what's happened to her, let me tell you a little bit about MEDUSA'S Sisters. So this book is so terrific, and I hope, oh, here she comes. So I hope that you all will put this list on your bedside table. I hope it's a book that you're definitely going to make an effort. Here she goes. Lauren, welcome back. We lost you just for a second, but you just need to make a bigger entrance. That's what that was. A bigger entrance. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oops. Okay, I'm going to let my producer Joe figure out what's going on. I think Lauren can't hear me. You can't hear me. Ugh.
All right, no, I think I figured it out. The tech muses are not with me today.
That's okay. It feels like the muses would have a handle in like messing with this. It feels very on brand, actually.
Well, and we'll probably talk about this later, but I'm such a Luddite. I handwrite my stories, so I am not the most tech savvy. I'll admit it right now.
Yeah, no, you're fine. So I was just talking about how much I love your book. So let me tell you a little bit about Lauren. She has probably one of the most entertaining bios of a writer we've had on the show so far. Lauren describes herself as a reader and a writer, an educator, and also a troublemaker and a fierce mama bear. She's also a former middle school teacher, which I cannot imagine like a trickier job than educating middle schoolers and all those hormones. And you survived that to become a writer of these wonderful books, this book I love so much. So we're excited to have you. And we should say that Lauren is joining us here today from Seattle. To our audience, we hope you have questions. We want to hear them. Put them below in the comments if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll get to as many as we can later on. So MEDUSA'S Sisters came out this year. So much buzz. I've seen it on all of these lists, must-read lists. Hi, Robin. Thanks for being here. And I just want to give you some highlights that I found. So MEDUSA'S Sisters is one of Bookpage's best books of the year. And in the Bookpage's review of the book, they describe it as a retelling of an old story, but one that conjures an unexpected ending from its familiar source materials. It is gorgeously crafted with an uncommon lyricism and attention to detail. The Boston Globe calls the book searing and poignant and thought-provoking. The Historical Novel Society highly recommends MEDUSA'S Sisters and specifically talks about your masterful skill and wit. Publishers Weekly calls MEDUSA'S Sisters an enticing plunge into the legends of ancient Greece. Library Journal gave you a starred review and said this is a must-read for Greek mythology fans seeking new depths in their tales. Not so bad for a debut novel.
You certainly know how to fill somebody's bucket. I talk about that with my kids a lot. Like, are our words filling each other's buckets or emptying each other's buckets? And my bucket is overflowing right now. So thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, I love the book, but all these people have said it. So I'm not the only one. There are many fans of this terrific book. And I love this trend in publishing of writers taking stories that we think we know and turning them around and telling them in a new way. Can you tell us a little bit about MEDUSA'S Sisters? What inspired you to tell this story?
Yeah, I think mythology, I almost think as storytelling is a part of our DNA, so is mythology. And these are the stories that have been passed down through the bloodline since the campfire, right? We are born with this love of story. Even when we close our eyes and we go to sleep at night, our brain continues to tell us stories, right? But I really believe that for stories to survive, they have to adapt and evolve just like we do. And
Yes.
so I think, this trend of retelling old stories is actually something we've been doing for a very long time. It's what stories have to do to engage in the current cultural conversation.
Mhm.
And I can tell the story of where the idea came from. So I was teaching middle school, as you mentioned. I did that for about 11 years. I was on maternity leave with my daughter. She's my middle child. And it was 2017, which everyone knows was kind of a fraught political time in the United States. Not that we're like so great right now, but 2017 felt a little dire in some ways. And I was up with her doing a feeding. It's like 3 in the morning. I'm so exhausted and have this crazy thought. Medusa was a Gorgon. I've studied this material my whole life. I have no idea who the other Gorgons are. And I'm like pretty embarrassed to admit this because I was a teacher, but I started on Wikipedia. Like I pulled out my phone over my baby's head and I went on Wikipedia and looked up Gorgon. And there's a quote, and it's the quote that starts the novel, actually, from Jane Ellen Harrison, who is a 19th century classical scholar. And she says, well, the other two Gorgons don't matter. They were appendages. Medusa is the only Gorgon that matters. And as a woman to hear that, holding my daughter, I was really overcome. Like, honestly, I took that like a gut punch. I just wasn't in the right frame of mind to accept that. And it became this passion project to find out more about who the Gorgons really were.
Oh, I love that. And that feels so appropriate for the story that you told, that this inspiration came in this moment of cultivating life.
Yes, and holding my baby and thinking so much about her, and I'm naturally kind of an anxious person, so just my mind would not stop spinning. And then I think when I went into the mythological record, because yes, I started in Wikipedia, but it did not end there. I went all into the primary sources, which you see in the novel at the back in the author's note. But really, it was like I was collecting puzzle pieces about these Gorgons for a puzzle that was never going to fit together, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't the same puzzle. There were so many gaps. And that's where I got to be creative and envision a different story for these women that was more empowering, more authentic. And I honestly think it was like the best therapy for me in my postpartum years was composing this story.
When I think about Medusa, I only ever, when I thought about Medusa before reading your book, and then when I thought about afterward what I knew about her, I only knew about her in relationship to Perseus, right? I only knew about her as a monster that was Perseus's hero's journey, that he needed to cut off her head and to win the girl, to win the kingdom, to to be the hero. I never thought of Medusa as her own being, right? You only think of her as monstrous and cruel and this disgusting creature that turns men to stone. And what I love so much about your book is this twisting of the story to give Medusa agency, to give Medusa heart and passions and sisters and love, and just make her a real person. And it's such a important shift of the way of we think of women being depicted in any kind of storytelling, right?
Well,
Behind the monster is really a person, is really a woman who lived and loved. Can you tell us a little bit about that? It's
100%. And I think what's even worse for Medusa is not only is she remembered as a monster, she's a head of a monster. Like
yes,
she's not even the full body. She is so objectified. And I think, we get introduced to mythology when we're really young. The first round of it is like 3rd grade, and it's very cool because they all have superpowers and they're all like so gorgeous looking and the
mhm,
stories are really fun and it's like the Avengers or something, right?
yes.
Um, and then if you have the opportunity to in your education, you re-examine these stories later as an adult, maybe in high school, maybe in college, and you realize they're highly problematic stories. Um, there's so much like graphic sexual assault and violation, and you realize that these are not the stories you remember from childhood. And one of the things that I find really exciting about young people today, and it's spreading to all of us, even us older people, is the hunger for a counter narrative and the desire to question the stories that we've been told, not just the material of the stories, but also who the storyteller is, right? And when we retell these old stories, it's a power exchange. We're like taking back power and taking power away from that traditional storyteller, which is very subversive, very cathartic, very cool. And the women in Greek mythology, especially, because this is the area I know best, right? And I'm sure this is probably ubiquitous to a lot of older stories. Um, they're so inauthentic. They are just archetypes. You know,
Yep.
there's like the faithful wife, like Penelope, or like the vengeful sorceress, Medea, or just like the sexy object of all men's desire, like Helen. Those are not, yeah, women can be all those things, but they're also so much more, right? And one of my first decisions for Medusa was she was not going to be the raging, wrathful, almost sexualized snake woman. She was
Right.
going to be kind and curious and something completely unexpected.
Yes. And we discover her kindness and her curiosity through these sisters. And you made these very interesting structural choices in the novel that I want to talk about. So it's called, very specifically, your book is called Medusa's Sisters. And Medusa is the character we know. And as you mentioned, people don't really know anything about the Gorgons. And it's in many stories, they're even unnamed, right? They don't even have names. And so your POVs in the story are the two sisters. They're never Medusa. She never narrates the story. That makes a lot of sense because the two sisters are immortal and Medusa is mortal. And I loved that back and forth between the two sisters. There are some other chapters where we spend time with Perseus,
Right.
but I loved the back and forth between the two sisters. I thought that was such a fascinating, almost like a Greek chorus, if you will, way of narrating the story and getting us into their thoughts and their feelings. Can you tell us a little bit about your choice to do that? And also, one of the sisters is in first person and one's in third person. So please talk about that as well, because I found that very intriguing.
Yes, these were all very intentional narrative choices, obviously. You know, when I started to figure out who these characters were, who these Gorgons were going to be, the sisters, I think the first thing I had to sit with was, what would it be like to be born together and one of you is always going to die?
Yeah.
And how do you, like, from the jump, from day one, how do you move forward from there in any way that feels balanced or fair? It's such a loaded way to begin life. And the two sisters, Steno and Euryale, have completely different responses to this.
Yeah.
Medusa is always going to die. Medusa is mortal. So Steno becomes completely overprotective. She has to take care of Medusa no matter what. And Euryale gets really bitter and feels like Medusa is holding them back. So when Steno is narrating, her interpretation of Medusa is very different than the way that Euryale interprets Medusa. And what is the truth? Well, something in between that, right? I think that, you know, we could wax poetic about what truth means for a while, but the closest we're going to get to it is that truth is when you take into account as many points of view as possible, right? I did make this decision to do first and third. I think because I'm an older sister myself, I related to Steno in a lot of ways. Also, Steno is a survivor, and I felt like she needed this first person voice. And then, you know, the other idea was that as a writer, access to a character is a privilege, right? And Euryale is a prickly personality. She would not give that privilege. She would not make that accessible. So it felt appropriate for her to be a little more distant and closed off to the reader.
Oh, that's so interesting. Oh, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. I also found this other part that I found really interesting was that you weave in many other stories. So we go to the sisters go to Thebes, and they meet. We already. Oh, I should say to the audience, Lauren and I already discussed how I'm going to mispronounce everything, and I apologize in advance. So they go to Thebes and they spend time with Cadmus and his family and their daughter, Semele.
Semele, very good.
Okay, there. Okay, bench. And that's a separate myth, and yet you incorporate that one in this story. And you've done that a couple of times in the story.
Well, there are so many gaps in the story of these Gorgons. We know who they're born to. We know at some point they end up in Athens because that's when they're cursed. And then we see them again on the island when Perseus arrives and decapitates Medusa. But that's pretty much it. So I had to create a plausible narrative that would bring them from being born of like literal sea monsters to Athens. And I had to do so in a way that was honoring the mythological chronology. And actually, if you look at this, so Perseus is like the great, 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 great grandfather of Hercules. So all of these stories are happening very, very early in the ancient Greek myths. So that does kind of alter where they could go or who they could interact with. I thought Thebes was great because it was really like the premier city before Athens. And even when they get to Athens, this is a pre-Pericles Athens. This is pre-Parthenon. This is not the golden age of Athens. So it's an older myth for sure.
It's interesting how you describe them because it's a lot like people who write historical fiction with real people, that how they have to be true to the timeline. And so you're doing the same thing with mythology, being true to the timeline of the stories to weave them together in a tapestry. I like that. I like that a lot. You also open the chapters with songs that are written by a character, which I loved as well. And for our readers out there, our viewers out there who haven't yet read the book, you have to read the book to find out why. But that feels like it really honored the story. And I actually went and I Googled the character. I was like, wow, is this a real person? So there is this mix you have of stories, myths we know, and then myths you are creating anew or brand new stories you're telling.
Well, it's so funny because the little songs at the beginning. So originally, I'll tell you a little behind the scenes info. Originally, I had all these really beautiful Anne Carson translations that I had purposefully picked to go with every single chapter. And it took me forever for my editor to just be like, you can't do that. Like the copyrights and the royalties and blah, blah, blah. Like you can't have all these Anne Carson quotes at the beginning of every chapter because I'm obsessed with her. She's brilliant and her translations are just so fantastic. And I was complaining about this to some girlfriends over some champagne and wine one night. And as one does, I was like, I have to get rid of all my poems. And I spent forever finding the blah, blah, like, woe is me. And one of my girlfriends just puts her drink down and she's like, you're a writer, write your own poems. It's like, oh, okay. So then I wrote my own poems. And yeah, it is funny too with what's real and what's not real. Like my book club actually did MEDUSA'S Sisters. Yeah, it was really sweet. And it was fun to talk about it because I realized how many of the events in the story, people didn't know if those were, fact or fiction. And a lot of it is made up. Like what happens with the shield, I made that up. Them meeting Semele or Medusa meeting the Sphinx. Like a lot of this was just, artistic creative freedom.
It's great. That's what the good story is when you can't tell, right? Which one the author created, which one she built upon. So one of the choices or one of the challenges I would think about writing a story about Medusa is that anyone familiar with the myth knows that she dies. Like Perseus cuts off her head. You can't really change that because that happened. And so I found that to be a question I had as I was reading the book. I kept thinking, so if I was writing this book, how would I approach the fact that I know the reader knows the outcome? And so you did this really bold thing, which is that the book begins with Medusa's decapitation. I say that, and it sounds like a nice word to say, murder. Like,
Yeah.
begins with Medusa's murder. And then we go back to the birth of the sisters and go all the way beyond. And again, the book is about the sisters. It's not only Medusa. And I thought that was such a fascinating structural choice. And I also found that it built so much tension. Like, I know she dies, and yet this book is filled with tension. And I wanted to know a little bit about your approach as a writer. How do you build that tension? How do you hook the reader, even though the reader knows what's going to happen to this major character?
I love that you brought this up and that you noticed what I was trying to do with the story, which is, yes, the elephant in the room is that she is going to lose her head. Everybody knows that's all they know about her. So yes, I decapitated her. I murdered her right away. And it was really meant to throw my reader off guard. If this is not the climax of the story, then what the hell is coming
Yes,
up? You know? Like,
exactly.
what else is gonna happen to these sisters, that's gonna lead them to that moment? So, yeah, it was very intentional, and I know some writers have mixed feelings about prologues. In this instance, I stand by my prologue. I love my prologue. The book I'm working on right now, Mother of Rome, has a prologue as well, but maybe I'll take a break from prologues after this.
But don't you think that prologues fit a certain type of story?
Yes.
Like, I feel like a book like this, like your book is, again, one of the reviews said it's a retelling of an old story. And those older stories feel to me like they need the grounding of a prologue sometimes. Like, maybe where a book that takes place in 2017 or 2023 perhaps don't need. So I don't know. There's something about that. It's a tool that's in your arsenal as a writer, and it's not always right, but it feels like it's right in this instance.
Exactly. It's kind of a never say never. You know, I'm teaching this creative writing class to middle schoolers, and we talk a lot about like what are the rules of writing.
Yeah.
But I'm such a rule breaker. You know, I think it's important to know what the rules are and to think about the rules so then you can think how to best break them.
Okay, so here's a great question. Rachel is asking us, I was in melancholy for days. This was beautifully written. I assume you're meaning you're melancholy for days after reading Medusa's Sisters the first time. I want to go back and read it again. What should I pay attention to the second time around? Ooh, such a good question, Rachel.
That is a fantastic question. Oh my gosh, Rachel. Okay, let me think. Um, you know, I pay a lot of attention to every word on the line. You know, I try to write with brevity and clarity, um, and not overdo things, which I know in fantasy in that world, fat books, big thick books, like, you know, we tend to go towards the more verbose side. But I'm very intentional with the words I choose, and I worked with a writer, Marie-Helene Bertino. She writes like really beautiful speculative fiction. And she said, it's almost like when you write, you want to go through every line with a teeny tiny um, not screwdriver, what are the wrench, right? And you like tighten every single word on the line. So I would hope that the first time you read this book, you read for plot, right? To find out what happens, what are these climactic moments if it's not the murder. And the second time would be to go back and hopefully appreciate the language.
Yeah.
You like let yourself be transported into this kind of Greek melodrama.
I was going to say that as someone who just finished it for the second time this week, I would say that what I was able to spend more time in the second go around was the sentence level. You know, the first time so caught up in the emotions and the story, and the second time I spent a lot of time thinking about rereading sentences, thinking about sentences, maybe looking up words I didn't actually know.
Yeah. Words. I collect words like Pokemon. I just love them. I get my word of the day emails. I look forward to them every morning. I am like the geekiest.
I get the word of the day email too, but I don't use it in sentences like you do, Lauren. Stephen wants to point out, yes, this book is so beautifully well written. Even if you are not familiar with Greek mythology, this book will capture your imagination and make you feel as if you were amongst the gods. Ooh,
Thank
That's a blurb.
you.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so Lauren, one of the questions I sometimes ask authors when they're on the show is about the shape of their novel. Now, sometimes when you read a book, you can see the shape of the story. And some books are a braid, some books are a diamond. And I was thinking about this when I was reading the book again. I thought, what is the shape of the story? And I mean, obviously, people might say, "Oh, it's a snake, it's Medusa," and and I thought, like, the shape of the novel. I wondered if you had a shape, if you had thought about that when you were writing the book.
Well, I'm curious what you have to say because I actually have two answers and they're different,
Ooh.
but whatever. We can suspend reality. I wrote a book where, you know, a sea beast gives birth to three beautiful girls. Like, what is reality anyway?
Well, I thought that the shape of this book, like the shape was this outline just for me, the shape was the outline of the three sisters when they would sleep in bed at night and their legs would be intertwined and their hair would be over one another's face. That's what I saw as like the shape or the image of the story. I
That's
wondered,
gorgeous. I
is it?
love that. And it works really well because at first I thought, oh, well, a braid, right? The three pieces of the braid. But
Mhm.
this is a messy braid. Like, this is not an even braid, and part of it gets cut off. So yeah, I like yours with this tangle. My other thought was going back to the snake. You know the Ouroboros, the snake that eats
Yes,
itself?
yes.
A little bit of that shape as well, because I really structured the book in, like, you know, when you read the Bible as literature, not as like a holy
Mhm.
text, you see how almost everything that happens in the Old Testament happens again in the New Testament. Like, it all foreshadows, the
Yes,
imagery links up, the
yes.
stories link up. And so a lot of what I had was that, like, everything before Athens kind of happens again after Athens
Mhm.
with different characters,
Yes.
but like those different the images are there, the themes are there, the birds come back, you know, the toxic love comes, like, anyway, so it kind of feels like that Ouroboros, like it's like
Mhm.
eating itself and continuing, if that makes sense.
Um, there's a lot in this book that it feels timeless. And there is this moment when in Medusa's story, and I'm just going to talk about this. People, if you don't know the story, I'm going to blow it for you, but I'm sorry. But if you Google Medusa, you will find this part of her story, which is that she is raped by Poseidon. And um, this is a terrible part of the story. It's part of the ominous feeling, right? Because you know this terrible things are going to happen to her, and it's a very traumatic event for not only Medusa but for her sisters. And then she becomes pregnant as a result of this assault. And there is this incredibly modern, it felt like such a modern conversation that the sisters have, because Medusa does not want the child. She does not want to be pregnant. She wants to get rid of it. They're not exactly like near a hospital or anything. They're on an island in the middle of nowhere. So it's not like they have access, but it's magic and they're immortal, the sisters at least. So you would think that they would have tools available in front of them, but what really happens is that they have a conversation about this child and whether or not to keep it. And that conversation that they had felt like a conversation that any woman would have at any time in the world. And
It's a brutal conversation, and it's a really raw conversation, because when they come into that moment, when Riley figures out that Medusa is pregnant and she does not take the news well, right? This is sisterhood at its peak, right? Or true longtime girlfriends. It's like there are so many built up layers in this
Mhm.
conversation of each of their respective relationships with each other and how they tackle this and how they treat her afterwards. And they're also very naive, and that's one of the things that hurts them throughout the story, is that they're constantly looking for a place to belong because they don't really belong with the monsters, they don't really belong with the humans. But because of that, they never really get like a full training in being a woman, in what your choices are and um what can happen to you. And so, yeah, I wanted that to feel realistic to the conversations that women have, um, anger and judgment and, you know, all the things.
Yeah, that is such an important point that these. women are so innocent. They are so innocent, and so many things happen to them because of that innocence. Like so many mistakes happen. They trust the wrong people. They
Yes.
don't learn. They don't know how to follow their gut. They don't know how to listen to their inner voice. And it's almost painful to see the mistakes that happen
It's
to
it
them from a
is yes, no, sorry to cut you off, Kimberly. It's
no, no,
like,
please.
you know, that Shakespearean quality of the missed communications, and you're watching in the audience and you're like, "No, don't do it. Don't
Yes,
drink the vial." Um,
yes,
but that's kind of a lesson that they have to learn is that when they didn't communicate and when they weren't open and honest with each other is when they failed.
yes, yes. That's absolutely and you have all these moments in the book where one of the sisters will see something or hear something and it's actually enormous and relevant, but they don't understand. They don't have context. They don't, and their relationship is complicated at this point, so they don't know how to say, like, hey, this weird thing happened, what do you think? It's almost like they're a puzzle and they just like don't know that the pieces fit together. And
Right, and
then
they all have separate pieces. They all have some information, but they're not sharing it with each other.
yeah,
Um, and that leads to their tragedy.
I wrote here that the way I was going to phrase it, I was, because that was my next question actually, was I was struck by how their ignorance condemns them. They are not wise to the dangers of men and gods.
No, and so much of that is because they had no mother figure, right? They have no, like, maternal or just even, like, responsible female role model for them to model as they're growing up and as they're navigating this really toxic world. And, you know, this has come up before too, like, this is not the book is not supposed to be, like, male bashing, you know, and I wanted to be really clear that there are such positive
Mhm.
examples of what it means to be a man in the book. You know, like I think Erastus is wonderful, Thales is wonderful, Orion, you know, there are good men in this story as well. I think what I wanted to criticize overall when I criticize the gods and goddesses is a system of absolute power where a minority of people, a very select group of people can act with impunity and nothing ever happens to them. And the goddesses are, I don't hold back on them either. Hera, Athena, they are just as problematic and vicious as Zeus and Poseidon are, because they're also a part of this system.
But you do balance them with gods and goddesses who are more kind and giving. I think about Leto,
Mhm.
and then I think about Artemis.
Yep.
And we also
Hephaestus.
have a yes, exactly. We also have Orion story in this. There's so many stories you've woven together, and so we do see this balance between the gods who are capricious and malevolent and selfish. And then we do see the gods and goddesses who are kinder, who are able to see the humanity in these women and help them in their times of need. And that balance, I think, is really important because I didn't feel like it was male bashing. I felt like it was the criticism of those in power who abuse that power.
Excellent. That's exactly what I was going for. It's the kind of the, like, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like that was the system in place. And um oh my goodness, what was I going to say here? Probably something poignant and perfect, but
I got it.
it has escaped from my brain. I'm sure it'll come back.
Well, let's talk about the sisters and their character arcs. You had said earlier that Steno was someone that you identified with. And I have to say that there were many times in this book where my heart broke for her over and over because I could see her grasping so hard at these sisters and wanting everything to be. Well, actually, there's a quote and she says, I know fear. And I felt like she was the person who lived with such fear, the one who just every day she was vigilant against a threat that would kill Medusa. She was so terrified of this possible outcome. And I just felt for her so much. And her character arc is fabulous. Like she is someone who is so scared. And not that the fear goes away, but she is someone who learns to use that fear, perhaps is a good way of saying it, Can you talk a little bit about your approach to the character arc?
Sure. I think that characters are most interesting when there's a disconnect between what the character wants and what the character needs, right? And it's like we find the story in that gap.
Mm,
And for Steno, what she thinks she wants is to protect Medusa and to keep her sisters together. And it's almost obsessive, right? Because
mhm.
fear can be obsessive, anxiety can feel obsessive, right? Um, what Steno needs is her own identity. She needs her own voice. She needs her own song. She needs words. And so that's what she needs to find. You know, for Euryale, she also has a huge gap between what she thinks she wants and what she needs. You know, what she thinks she wants is the love of Poseidon, this like super toxic
Terrible guy.
um, F boy, right? And then he is, put him on F boy island, he would rule. But then you know what she actually needs is to give love is and she actualizes once she can allow herself to give just pure uncomplicated non-toxic love.
Absolutely. There's a line in Steno's story, and I felt like you had written it for me, or like anybody that like lived through the past, 6 years in America. Um, and this is kind of later on in the book, and she says, "quote I was so tired of being resilient." And this is someone who's been through so much trauma. This is after Medusa is murdered, and I just felt like, oh girl, I know what you're talking about. Like we're constantly told to be resilient, and sometimes it's just like life is hard and we carry so many burdens, and I mean she really does. And I don't know, I just found like readers can really find parts of their experiences and their lives in these characters.
I think so. I think that um even when they're transformed, right, and they become these creatures, I mean, what woman, what human hasn't felt ugly or like they don't belong or no one will ever find me attractive? Like the reason myths persist is because of the universality of these themes. And um I think that we all can relate to those moments.
Oh, I like that. The reason these myths persist is because of the universality of the themes. It's true. It's true. It's why we tell our children stories. It's why we read stories. It's to find ourselves on the page. It doesn't matter how old the story is.
Right. And you know, we've talked a lot about counter narratives, taking back female voices, but I also think like we have a um obsession, right? The American audience with like the perception and the creation of evil. Like it's
Mhm.
really fascinating. So if you can also find a counter narrative that's not just a woman but a villain, it's like, well, that's even, you know, that's checking all the boxes. I think we're really interested in that. I was talking about it with my little girl who again, now she's 6, right? But the story came from a nursing of her so many years ago. But I had said to her, I was like, well, why do you think mom writes about villains or wrote about a villain? Why do you think that matters? And she thought about it for a while. She's like, well, I guess it's like if someone robbed you, it would still feel really bad that they robbed you. But if you knew why they needed to, maybe you would understand them better. I was like, ding, 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 ding. Like, exactly. You know, all of these stories, every time you pick up a book, right, it's an opportunity for compassion because you are, it does not matter if it's in ancient Greece or if it's like, you know, demon copperhead and we're in like, you know, modern day Appalachia. Every book is an experience to live a different life, and to feel love and empathy and compassion for a different lifestyle and a different experience. I really believe that. I think reading is good for the soul.
Absolutely. Can you hold up the book? I know you have a copy there in front of you. I love this cover so much. It's so beautiful. So I hope our viewers can see how Medusa is in the background as like a shadow. Such a beautiful cover.
Thank
I
you.
wondered, so one thing about the sisters, I wondered if this came out of your research or it was your creation. When the sisters are turned into these creatures, they all have snakes on their head, and we know Medusa, like mythology tells us Medusa had many snakes, but the other sisters don't have the same number of snakes. Was that something that you came across in your research, or was that you? That was you. Oh,
I
that's
made
brilliant. Okay, that's brilliant because the snakes represent their stories, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
Steno has. Go ahead.
3, and
Steno
Riley
has
has
3, and Uriah has 1. Yeah, and that's so perfect because that represents their stories.
yes, and their heartstrings. And that was actually, you know, we talked about the early conception and how I was figuring these characters out and what it would be like to live in a trilogy, but it's an unbalanced triangle. One of you's going to die. The second decision, even before I wrote any words, was I had to decide what Steno and Riley were going to look like. And I
Mm.
knew I did not want them to look like Medusa. I didn't want the Versace logo. I didn't want that screaming head with the green snakes. They had to look different. So I spent a lot of time reading about snakes and looking at snakes and thinking about snakes. I don't even really like snakes that much, but I learned a lot. And I created these alternate versions of different snakes on the head. And then I'm not kidding, their personalities almost organically grew from there.
Yeah. Well, that's a great technique for any writer out there who's struggling with character development is you have to be able to see your character. You have to
Yes.
physically understand what your character looks like, and then maybe that will unlock a challenge you're having.
Yeah, because that's when you realize, like, oh, wait, they walk with a limp. And where did that limp come from? And then there's this whole new story, and it really does, snowball from there.
I've been remiss to invite our audience to ask questions. Please post them below. We still have some more time for your audience questions, so please share them. The other thing I want to point out is that below the broadcast, we're putting in links to purchase MEDUSA'S Sisters. And Lauren, this show is called Authors Love Bookstores, so we should ask you a little bit about your relationship to indie bookstores. Would you like to use this opportunity to give any shout outs to any indies that you enjoy going to, or perhaps have been supportive to you in your book tour?
Heck yeah, I would. In Massachusetts, Belmont Books, the nicest humans. I love them. Bunch of Grapes on Martha's Vineyard, obsessed. Such good people. I also did an event at Bookshop Santa Cruz. They're a delight. Indie bookstores are my happy place. I think they're a happy place for a lot of people. There is no joy like the smell of a bookstore. I love it. In Seattle, we're really blessed with so many independent bookstores to choose from. We have Elliott Bay Books in Capitol Hill. Madison Books down in Madison Park is a delight. It feels like an old world experience, like almost like the kind of little shop you stumbled off into in Paris, where it's like just this little bookstore. Third Place Books is wonderful. University Bookstore did my launch. I could go on and on. I'm going to Sundance Books next week in Northern Nevada, in the Reno area. So I would love to see people there and sign books as well. We're doing a Black Friday event to really encourage people to spend their holiday gift giving money in local bookstores.
Absolutely. So we'll put links to those bookstores below. And if someone wanted to get a signed copy, which is sort of the local bookstore in Seattle that they should order from?
I could probably Elliott Bay Books is the easiest because it's right near my house.
Okay, we'll put that link below. So what are you reading? Now, our audience always loves to hear what the authors are reading. What's on your bedside table, or what have you just finished reading, or maybe even what you're looking forward to reading?
Yes, I am reading. Well, my book club right now is doing lessons in chemistry. I feel like I'm reading that now. And it's an absolute joy. It is so much fun to read this book. I also really want to read Black Sheep, which is the new one by Rachel Harrison.
Okay.
So good. I love her. I'm kind of like looking around. Oh, I read Whale Fall. Did anyone read Whale Fall? It's Daniel Kraus. Oh my gosh, you guys, this book is a 17-year-old kid who gets swallowed by a sperm whale. And he's inside the whale's belly with 1 hour of oxygen left on his tank.
So it's kind of like Noah. Wait,
Yes,
not
it's so
Noah.
good. And he's on this
Noah,
father.
the one who gets swallowed by the whale?
What
Or
was
am I
that?
thinking? Is it
Yeah,
Noah who gets swallowed by the whale?
Jonah.
Which one? I'm sorry.
Jonah.
Jonah. Right. I knew Noah was wrong. Noah's the ark. Okay, Jonah gets swallowed by the whale, or Pinocchio, depending upon your frame of reference.
Or Nemo and Dory, they get swallowed
Or
by.
Nemo and Dory. We can date ourselves all by these references.
No, what
Okay.
he does that's so brilliant is every chapter is how much oxygen he has left in the tank.
Ooh, talk about tension.
So you're literally watching the numbers tick down. It's so good. It's so, so good.
What do you hope that readers will take from Medusa's Sisters when they get to the last page and they close the book? What do you hope they take from it, stays with them? What's the question you wanted to answer? I know you said in the beginning you wanted to know who the Gorgons were, the other sisters, but what's the big question you're asking with the book that you want them to take with them?
I hope you walk away from this experience asking more questions, asking better questions, and to be kind, because these are very maligned and misunderstood characters. And once you hear their story, you love them and you realize how real they are. And that lesson applies to everything in life, right? Is just, ask questions and be kind.
Excellent. You have another book coming
do.
out, Mother of Rome. Tell us about this book, please, or whatever you can tell us about this book.
Yes, Mother of Rome, we are about to enter copy edits, so we're far along in this process now. It is Rea Silvia. So I hopped over the sea into ancient Italy, but this is Latium. This is the Latin tribes of Italy. It's not Rome. It's Rome before it's Rome. So very, very old. And she was a princess and a Vestal Virgin who gets pregnant, Vestal Virgin who gives birth to the twins Romulus and Remus, who go on to found the city of Rome. So it's been really fun to kind of be in a different physical setting, to work within a different pantheon, which is similar, but also kind of a hybrid, because it's a collection of who the old Latin gods were, plus the ones that came over from Troy. And to really focus on one kind of feisty heroine.
And how did you come to this story? How was this an idea that you decided to focus on?
I've always really wanted to write a series of novels that tackle old tales under like kind of the labels that are placed upon women, or the roles women play in society. So it's like sister, mother, wife, whore, and witch. And I thought I would do wife next. And I pulled a tarot card because I was taking this really great class on tarot for fiction writers. And I got like basically the Mother Earth card. And I thought, nope, I guess I'm going mother next. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. I'm really proud of this book. I worked really hard on it. This one was a struggle, but I'm really proud of where it is.
And do you have a date that's coming out?
I believe, do not quote me, but it should be August of next year, August 2020.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. So we've included your website link below and all of your social media, so people should go subscribe so they can get the first heads up when Mother of Rome.
Yeah, and there'll be a cover reveal soon. I've seen it. It's so cool. It's very reminiscent of Medusa's Sisters cover, so I hope people really like it.
So is that what we should look forward to? Is that sort of your plan going forward, is to write a series of novels that each explore the different? Oh, that's wonderful. Will you return to?
I already started the third book. I started it on Monday. I wrote the first line. So there's one line.
Yay, that's wonderful. And will you return to the Greek myths?
Actually, for this one, I am. I don't know how much I can say about this one, but I am going back to Greece for the third one. And it's going to be more about love.
Ooh, I'm intrigued and excited. Wonderful. Well, definitely I'm going to Oh, I already follow you on social media, so I will wait with bated breath to hear about Mother of Rome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You are an absolute joy to talk to. It's so easy. It feels just like I'm at like book club with my girlfriends. You
Mine,
know, next
mine
time
is
we'll
the
have
same
a
thing.
next time we'll have a glass of wine while we do this
Yes,
too.
exactly. I like that idea. Everyone out there, please go check out a link that we have below. My producer Joe put a whole bunch in there to follow a link to go pick up a copy of Medusa's Sisters. This is a read for you, a great purchase with the holidays approaching. This will be a wonderful gift for the reader in your life. It's really perfect for anybody who loves the Greek myths and really wants to know more about Medusa and who loves sisters. So please go check it out. If you like today's show, we hope, and we certainly hope that you did, we will be back in 2 weeks for our 153rd episode. My co-host Joe will be hosting Lisa Gornick and talking about her new novel. Lauren, best of luck in your continued journey to share Medusa's Sisters with all the readers out there. Thank you for being with us. Oh, one last question before we go off. Rachel wants to know, will you be doing a Seattle book event anytime soon? Good, getting it in the right under the wire, Rachel.
That is an excellent question. And you know what? I'm gonna look into it. I'm gonna see what else I can do. It is a busy time of year. Did I mention I have 3 children? But I will try to do another event in Seattle, and I will let you all know. And honestly, when you were saying best of luck and all these really kind words, really why I need luck is because at 2:10, my middle school creative writing class begins. So that's what I actually need luck for is, navigating these delightful children.
Well, I'm sure that they are going to have a wonderful class. Those were lucky kids to be spending time with you, talking about creative writing. And we will let you go so you can be on time for your class. Thank you again for joining us. And to our audience, until we meet again, be well and keep reading.